Freakish History takes a deep dive into stranger-than-fiction historical events and plops the listener down in the middle of the bizarre and compelling action. In Season 1, we head to Cleveland, Ohio for the 10-cent beer night riot of 1974. Welcome to Heading for Home, a 10-cent beer night odyssey. I'm Eric Olson. Every year, the media celebrate the anniversary of the 10-cent beer night riot of 1974 at Cleveland Stadium. Fans, awash in cheap beer, streaked, chanted obscenities, pelted the players with everything from hot dogs to explosives, then charged the field and brawled viciously with the visiting Texas Rangers and their own home team Indians. This is that story. Before we launch into the Heading for Home docudrama in 2 weeks, let's dig into the events of that fateful game at Cleveland Stadium on June 4th, 1974. This week, we speak with attendees Buck McWilliams, Terry Yerkic, and Jim Clark. Besides being my good friend and baseball teammate at Chagrin Falls High School, Buck McWilliams attended the 10-cent beer night game. He has had a distinguished career as morning show host at top radio stations in Toledo, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Manchester, Columbus, West Palm Beach, and Miami, Fort Lauderdale. He is currently Senior Account Manager at Audacy Radio stations in Cleveland. Welcome, Buck.
Oh, I'm breathless just listening to this intro, but thank you. Yeah. And we went to that game that night. In fact, as we're sitting here looking at a beautiful cloudless day, it reminds me of the day that the game took place. It was just an absolutely beautiful day. And one of the reasons why we went was because we knew it was going to be a beautiful night too. But I got to tell you, even before you asked me about, setting the stage for that day and that night, we were a painting crew, all right? Me and a couple of our classmates also. We painted. And during the day, to keep us company, we had the radio blasting. And in part, egged on to go to that game last night by all the chatter that the announcers were giving during the day, talking up the game. And sure, the fact that it was 10-cent beer night, that was an inducement too. But we were really more interested, if you recall, the Indians had a pretty good team that year. They had a lot of, they had some good pitching. They were competitive. Granted, it was June. That would fizzle out by the end of August, but it was fun to watch them. And it was easy to watch them because that year, I think also the second year in a row that they had priced bleacher seats at 50 cents. Well, you're talking pocket change. It was early in the week, and we had, spare change that would buy us not only admission to the game, but a bunch of beers too, because it was dime beer night. Not the first time that they had done that, not the first time that we had taken advantage of dime beer night. So here it was, all day long under the hot sun. It was a beautiful early June day. We're all trying to figure out what are we going to do tonight, and they're talking about Billy Martin's Texas Rangers coming into town, dime beer night. Why would you not want to go to the stadium? And they had only sold they were only expecting a crowd of 10,000, but apparently there was 15,000 more people like us who went to the game, and it swelled to about 25,000 people went to that game that night.
So where did you guys sit?
Well, we started out in the bleachers, of course. And the bleachers were full that day of 50-cent patrons. And the nice thing was that, out there, they also had, refreshment stands. So we didn't have to go anywhere. We just went down underneath to the bleachers. But what happened as we started watching, as the game was progressing, around about the third or fourth inning, it became apparent that you could sneak in and get better seats. They had this flimsy, board that you might see otherwise posted over broken windows in a building. They had this thing there. It was very easy to sneak through, and we saw a lot of people doing it. Now, we didn't do it for a while because we thought, first of all, we were fine where we were. But then again, if you're sitting there going, well, we could sit in the bleachers or we could sit there and, third base and get better seats. Why not? So about the fifth inning or so, that's what we did too. And, as we looked back at the bleachers, there was fewer and fewer people. So we snuck in like a lot of other people did, and we took our seats around the third base side. Pretty good seats. So, there's a lot of other people were up in the upper deck.
And of course, that's where a lot of the action was, because that's where the Rangers dugout was. And there was already like border wars going on between fans and the players, and especially Billy Martin.
Right.
Because of all of this agitation, before the game, and because, of course, the 5 days earlier in Texas, the brawl with
Lenny Randle.
With Lenny Randle.
Yeah.
Precipitated by Lenny, but finished off by the fans, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing too. I mean, first of all, we were big baseball fans, so we were very aware of Billy Martin and his antics and how he would, ramp up with the crowd, how he would agitate his own players. And we thought, well, here we are rubbing our hands together going, oh, this is going to be great. It's like a scene out of Animal House. Oh, boy, is this great. So we were all primed and ready to go. And, a lot of the fans were too. But, yeah, to your point, a lot of it did happen on the third base side. So we found ourselves in a really good position to watch what was playing out.
Did you notice some of the other people we've spoken to, including the world famous Terry Yerkic, that he had really noticed, and what a lot of observers did, there were lots of fireworks going off, explosions throughout the game.
Yeah, there were, and I don't know what the impetus of that was. I mean, it was about a month, almost a month before 4th of July, so people were getting their fireworks. But you might remember this too. At the end of the school year in Chagrin, where we went to high school, there was a lot of those same fireworks being blown off. I don't know how we got them or what.
Saved from the year before.
Well, yeah, probably. But, you'd be sitting in class and all of a sudden you'd hear a big M80 or a cherry bomb go off and that's hysterical. And, I may have lit some of those off myself.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
well, statute of limitations is up.
Yeah, well, thank goodness, too, because, we were miscreants to the nth degree. But, yeah, for some reason, cherry bombs and M80s proliferated the scene. And that carried over, I guess, to the ball games. But, yeah, you're right. I remember a lot of fireworks were going off.
Did you see, like when we talked to Terry, he said sure, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of, antics. And, of course, there were streakers and flashers and lots of people running across the field and whatnot. But overall, he felt that the tone in the stands was pretty cheerful and positive until the very end.
Well, I'll tell you why. A lot of bored people were drunk and had nothing else to do because the Rangers were beating up on the Indians. Now, as the game went on, the Indians were clawing back. And that's what really irritated me. And I remember saying as we were leaving, they just tied it up. We were getting ready for a huge celebration because they had some momentum going. So, yeah, we were down 5-0, I believe. And we ended up, clawing our way back. So it became, again, a competitive ball game. And we
had a runner on third when the game was called.
Yes. And so I remember Lowenstein, hit in the tying run?
Sack fly.
Yeah. And then here we are getting ready to win the game, and everybody's going to go crazy and go home with a win. And, that was kind of spoiled. And we were very disappointed about that. Watching what was playing out in front of us was one thing, but there's a Major League Baseball game going on, and we got really good seats. And guess what? We're going to beat Billy Martin and stuff it back in his face any minute now.
And had the Indians won that game, they would have been 500.
Right.
They were one game under going into that game.
Yep.
And instead of the win and being 500, they came out of it 2 games down because of the forfeit. So what are your memories of the ninth inning? Besides, so you got on the field, there's plenty of action going on. The Indians are tying it up,
And so we happened to be sitting behind four well-dressed Japanese businessmen. And they were in front of us. I don't know if it was right in front of us or a couple of rows in front of us. And, so we're laughing because like, oh boy, these guys are still in their suits and all that. And they probably haven't seen one of these things, back in Japan where baseball is really big. And so we're taking it all in. Can't believe what we're seeing. Never seen anything like this before. And then I happen to look down on the field. This is well into the, to the riot. The game has been called. And I see at second base, those same four businessmen in their suits, and they're all crowded around second base, and one of them is bent over, and they're trying to remove the base from the field. And the other three are egging them on, and they're like, it's like an Indian war hoop dance, And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I'm like, look, guys, the people that we were with, look at this, look what's going on at second base.
When in America,
right.
Do like Americans.
Exactly.
Couldn't get away with that in Japan.
That was normally couldn't get away with that anywhere.
That's pretty aberrant behavior anywhere, I guess.
So that's my big takeaway. That memory has been etched in my mind forever. And then we just kind of said, we better get out of here because it's getting kind of dangerous. And so we did. And, as we're walking back to the car, a lot of other people, were engaging in them talking about, wow, what did you see? And, I remember one guy saying, Burroughs wasn't down. He fell down kicking that other guy, who was Terry. I remember Terry, boy. He was the instigator.
Yes.
We didn't know him, but we saw him.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, his story is so funny because he is otherwise a very accomplished person. He was the man of the year on Richmond Heights in 2000. And the year before this happened, the game in 1973, he was the 185-pound state wrestling champion.
Oh, no wonder they were afraid of him.
How about it's just hilarious.
From Maple Heights?
From Richmond Heights.
Richmond Heights, okay.
So do you remember anything about the aftermath of the game?
I just remember we went home and I went to my house and my dad, who was usually asleep because it was like 11 o'clock at night, 11:30, he was up. He goes, you guys went to the game, didn't you? And I was like, I couldn't wait to tell him all about it. So I did, but he was like, I'm listening to Herb Score and Joe Tate, and they're just, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing, and I couldn't wait for you to get home. I said, well, it's surprising to see you up, because usually you're asleep by now. So, I mean, that's what I remember.
It was a work night.
Yeah, it was. Well, and not only that, but he went to work at what was then Erie View Plaza, which is now the Galleria. But I took his, I always had his card to get in, so we parked for free, yeah. Right? And he wanted to make sure that I brought the card back so he could get back into work tomorrow. So, but that's what I remember. After we got to the car, we really wanted to kind of get out of there before.
The writing was on the wall.
Before the police started showing up and arresting people.
Yeah, which was shortly thereafter.
Yeah, there were some arrests that night.
Oh, yeah. I think there were 11 arrests, which even that seems really small.
Well, remember, there's how many more can 3 cops arrest? Right? That's all they had.
And by the time the riot squad showed up, the writing was on the wall and people were clearing out. Even the rioters were clearing out. Yeah. So, yeah, it's one of those magical, bizarre, and strange nights, and you were there.
Yeah, I was, and it's one of those nights that I'll never forget. I mean, we're both big baseball fans.
Oh, yes.
We both played. I didn't throw the no-hitter, you did. But, but in all my time, I've seen a lot of things that I say when I saw it, I've never seen that before. But I've never seen that before or since. Or since, yeah. So, there's that.
Terry Yerkic was Ohio State wrestling champ his senior year at Richmond Heights High School in 1973, where he also played football. And he earned a full-ride scholarship to Cleveland State University. A versatile athlete, he played 16-inch softball for 14 years and went to the national championship 4 times. As a citizen of Richmond Heights, Terry served on the recreation board, Master Plan Committee, served 20-plus years as Santa Claus for Breakfast with Santa, coached football at Richmond Heights High School and Middle School, and was girls softball commissioner. He was inducted into the Richmond Heights Sports Hall of Fame in 1988 and was Richmond Heights Citizen of the Year in 2000. Yet despite all these impressive and virtuous deeds, Terry will go down in history for something else. Welcome, Terry. It's so nice to have you and to be able to speak to you. What is that exactly, do you think, that you will be best known for, perhaps in posterity?
It would be 10-cent beer night riot at Cleveland Stadium with the Indians.
So how did all of that come about? Give us a little background.
Well, we always used to go to the baseball games. We had a friend that his uncles were the groundskeepers, the bossards for the stadium. So we were always down at the stadium watching games or watching practices. And as it was on June 4th, it was 10-cent beer night at the stadium. And myself and 4 other friends went down to the stadium, just have an enjoyable evening. And it all turned crazy.
And you were 19 then, right?
Correct.
And you mentioned that you, at that time, you could walk right into the stadium with your own cup, with your own all kinds of stuff. So what did you guys do?
We brought our own containers. I had an A&W root beer plastic keg, about a quart, and we were allowed to fill up our containers with beer.
So how did that work? You were out in the bleachers?
We were in the left field bleachers, and the beer truck was set up right in front of the bleachers, right behind the left field home run fence, and that's where we were starting to get our beer from.
So is that early in the game that you were able to do that?
Yes. We were there about 45 minutes early, and so we got some beers early. But then it really started. There was a flash-up crowd of 21,000 people. Normally we'd have 3,000-4,000 people at the Indians, and that's kind of what they were expecting. And there was such a flash-up crowd, then the lines just got so long at the beer truck.
So they were selling beer out of the truck as well as at the concession stands?
Yes, because in the bleachers there were no concession stands there. That's why they had the truck in front of the bleachers.
So you said it became kind of a serve yourself type situation as the game was progressing?
That's true. Nearing about the 4th inning, it was getting so long to get a beer. The fans, including myself and our friends, we just took the tables away, and the 2 girls that were manning the truck, they just walked off. And so we had the beer trucks to ourselves. So we were filling our own containers, even to the point where we would flip the tap and tilt our head back and just pour the beer into our mouths. And when the keg got empty, somebody would jump up in the truck and connect a new keg of beer.
Truly serve yourself.
Yes.
Were you leaving a dime for each cup? Were you estimating, here's another dime, here's a dime?
No, we weren't thinking about that. We were just happy to get our beer.
What did you notice happening throughout the game besides what you guys were doing?
Every inning it started to get just a little more wild, just a little more crazy. Streakers on the field. A lady went up to the umpire and flashed him. People between innings were jumping on the field, running the bases. It's just everybody was having a really, really good time.
What was the mood?
It was happy. It was good. We were all having a lot of fun. And the Rangers, they were being harassed. And even as it was in Texas the week before, fans were throwing hot dogs at them. They were throwing anything they could find.
Did you witness any of this action where people were like literally ripping seats out of the concrete of the stadium and breaking them up?
No, we didn't see that. We, as I said, we were in the bleachers. So, we were sitting on hard benches.
So as the game progressed, it sounds like you kind of rotated over to the actual fence itself. Is that where you were ending up later in the game?
Right. We were middle of the game. We started just standing on the home run fence on the middle bar. And once every long while, a policeman would walk by, tap us on the back of the legs with his stick. We'd hop down. He'd walk off. We would just hop back up. They really didn't care.
And were you interacting with any of the players at that point?
No, at that point we were just watching the game. Standing on the home run fence that close to the action was better than being in a loge.
It certainly was. So as we got into the ninth inning, when things were certainly starting to get delicate, as it were, what was your situation and what happened from there?
Well, we had moved over to the right field fence and standing on that, and Jeff Burrows was in right field, and he was there, and I saw his hat, and I just decided I wanted to get his hat. So I jumped the fence and ran up behind him and grabbed his hat, and I had it in my hand, and I dropped it. So I went down to pick it up. I looked up, and he looked at me. I said, "Oh, hell." And he kicked me right in the thigh. He left perfect spike marks in my thigh, and he fell down. And unbeknownst to me, Billy Martin with the Rangers thought he had been hurt. So he told the Rangers to grab bats, and so they were running out to the outfield chasing me. And so I took off and ran across the outfield to the left field, and the fans there, back then, the warning track was gravel. So they opened up the fence where the grounds crew would come through so I could run out, and then they were grabbing gravel and throwing it at the Rangers, and they repelled them from me. So I got back up into the bleachers, and then all hell broke loose. All the fans.
Did you have the hat?
No, I never got the hat. Once he kicked me, I thought better part of discretion was get out of here.
You kind of like snapped back into reality, it sounded like. You made the right move, I would say.
Right. It really dawned on me, this is really a bad decision.
So what did you see? Were you able to see back then over the fence once you were out of harm's way? Were you able to see what was going on the field?
Yes, I walked back up into the bleachers because I still had 4 other fans there, my brother included, and 2 of them, my brother and a friend of mine that was in Richmond Heights High School, were trying to get into the Rangers dugout to get souvenirs while they're chasing me. And the other 2 that we went with, they were younger. They couldn't get over the fence, so they stayed there. So they were heading to the dugout. I was running for my life from the Rangers and got up into the bleachers. I was just waiting for them so we could meet back up and get out of there because it had really gotten out of control.
What did it look like on the field?
Oh, it was just a massive humanity. There was just fans everywhere. The players were still on the field. Fights were starting to break out because they were, the ball players were protecting themselves. And so it just became total chaos.
So did your brother make it into their dugout?
No. The trainers or people that were left in the dugout started swinging bats to keep people out of the dugout. That's when people were grabbing bases and stealing the bases, and it just, they never got in.
So I imagine it felt quite different from the earlier mood.
Oh yes, it became really, really dangerous, and it was becoming just untenable.
Any thoughts on why the mood changed so dramatically, just in retrospect?
Well, I think just as it was getting crazier and crazier during the game, most of the fans knew better, just stay put. But then once in the 9th inning, once a big amount of fans started running on the field, they just thought it was a blank check to do whatever they wanted to do. So everybody was just kind of following the direction of the early crazies.
So what happened in the aftermath of the game?
Well, we got it. met up with my friends, my brother, and we got out of the stadium, no harm, and just wanted to get back home.
Did anything happen? Were there any consequences of the of your activities?
Well, not for me. We kept, it was kept pretty quiet because it was not a good thing. As it ended up, it was a bad decision. But we didn't. There was no consequences for us. Now, I had a friend who was just he was just ending his junior year at school, and he went in the next morning, and all of a sudden he heard over the PA system the principal wanted to see him. And so he went up to the principal's office, and our principal was a great guy, just a wonderful guy. And he asked my friend, he says, "Jim, what'd you do last night?" And he said, "Oh, nothing, Mr. Chulik. I didn't do anything." He goes, "Did you go to the game?" No, Mr. Chulik, I didn't go to the game." He goes, "You sure you didn't go to the game?" He goes, "No." He goes, he says, I'll give you one last chance. Did you go to the game?" So he knew he was caught. He confessed and says, "Yeah, I was there." And our principal read him the riot act and about representing the school, the community, himself. And as my friend was walking out, he turned around to the principal and asked him, "Mr. Shuley," he goes, "how did you know?" He goes, "Next time, don't wear your letter jacket on the field, you idiot." As we found out, our principal was a statistician for the Indians. So he was wearing his letter jacket with a big Richmond Heights and his name across the back, and he was caught.
Red lettered, as it were. So when did you kind of go public? When did it become known that was you, that you were the guy who grabbed the hat?
Probably the most major time was Cleveland Magazine had found out that that I was part of that, so they had called to do an interview with me and a photo shoot, and so I went down and we did it. And it was a real nice article, and after that it just started gaining speed because it was out there.
Right. Well, because you really were kind of the catalyst. All this was building, of course, throughout the game, but the actual catalyst for that final onslaught was your approach.
Yeah, it was the spark that lit the powder keg, because it was the ninth inning. It was bottom of the ninth, and everybody was just ready. And once I went on the field, and once they opened the gate so I could get out, and all the fans started rushing in through the gate, then people were jumping over the lower deck walls, and just one led to another, led to hundreds and hundreds.
What's your guess on the total? There's never really been an accurate, all we can go by are pictures and the little tiny bit of video there is. What's your guess on how many fans went onto the field?
There was a lot. It was just the whole field, even the outfield, was filled with fans. There, like I said, there had to have been hundreds, maybe even thousands on that field.
So did you, when you're watching this after you were safely back in the stands, did you see actual mayhem? Did you see anything that truly frightened you?
Just from a distance, you could see the action going on, not specifically which player was there, which one was defending himself, and they were punching fans, and the Indians were helping them. And it could have been a real disaster if the Indians hadn't have stayed on to protect the Rangers.
So you think the fans would have really gone after him at that point?
It had gotten that far out of control.
So what were the forces that aligned? Obviously, a ocean of beer was certainly a important factor. Anything else that comes to mind of why that happened that time versus any other time? Because there was another 10-cent beer night 6 weeks later, and there were no problems, no issues.
Well, the thing is, after what happened with the first one, it certainly, the warning was out there. But for the second one, I believe you were only allowed 6 beers.
And there was a lot more security.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, it only makes sense that it was just on everyone's mind by then anyway. But for 10 Cent Beer Night, for the riot, any thoughts on what specifically led? Why the perfect storm that night?
Well, I think there was a lot of different reasons. It was a beautiful night and a 10 cent beer night. But back then, you could drink at 18. So this brought a different crowd for that game, for the ballpark, for 10 cent beer. And being young and stupid and drinking, I think a lot of the younger fans took advantage of it.
Right. Yeah, all the reports say that of that 21,000 plus, that it was very notable that it was a lot of high school and college age people, more than usual.
Absolutely. It was filled with young people. There wasn't, not that I saw a lot of families in the park or elderly, not for 10 cent beer night. Watching it, from the bleachers after the ninth inning, after they canceled the game, or even a little bit before they canceled the game, people were throwing cherry bombs into the Rangers dugout. This is how dangerous it got. It just, fireworks, explosives were being tossed. I mean, it just seemed like a lot of people had fireworks that night. Of course, as we were younger back then, all of us played with fireworks.
I imagine that was a factor. But yeah, if you have explosives going on throughout the game.
It's just explosive, people just running wild, nudity with people flashing and streaking. It just had everything.
And it just kept escalating.
It absolutely did. And until the police finally came to the stadium and they started using gas.
Right. Well, it was the riot
Yeah.
squad that arrived finally, as I understand it, after a policeman in his car, in his cruiser, heard Herb and Joe over the radio say, "I think we got a riot here," and he called it in. A cop called it in.
They were completely understaffed with people to serve beers, police, security, ushers. They were overwhelmed. It was just. They never imagined what was about to happen.
They sure didn't. Well, Terry Yerkic, what a pleasure to speak with you. And I must say you have accomplished many wonderful things in your life. And imagine what it would be like to be only known as the instigator of the 10 Cent Beer Night riot. But in your case, that is not the case.
No, it was just part of a story of knucklehead 19-year-old growing up, family and community, and most kids go through something like that.
Do
in their
something
life.
dumb, that's
Yes,
for sure.
It's inevitable.
All right, well, thank you so much. Great talking to you. Appreciate your input, and you will always be remembered as the hat thief at 10 Cent Beer Night.
Yes, I wish I would have came home with it.
Jim Clark is the author of Rally Round Cleveland, the story of the 1974 franchise-saving Cleveland Indians, and has been the radio voice of the Akron RubberDucks, formerly called the Canton-Akron Indians and Akron Aeros, for 30 years. He recently called his 35th 100 game for the team. Jim was inducted into the Greater Akron Baseball Hall of Fame in 2019. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
I am fascinated by your effort on Rally Round Cleveland, which is literally a game-by-game description of the season of the 74 Indians. What brought that on, that monumental task? What drove you to it?
Well, I really thought that if not for that year, we would not be talking about the Cleveland Guardians, or after that, Cleveland Indians baseball. Franchise attendance was plummeting throughout the 70s. They were threatened to leave. Hank Greenberg and his father-in-law wanted to ship them out late 50s, 58. They bought Greenberg out, They rallied in 59, had a great year, finished in second place. Colavito hit 42 home runs, 4 in one game. They 5 games from a pennant that year. Then they traded Rocky, and that hurt attendance again. You got to the 60s where they had really bad years. Browns outdrew them with then 7 home games, and probably 62, 63, 64. And 64 was really bad. There was talk of getting them out during the 64 season. They were meeting in Seattle, Minneapolis. They thought they were in Seattle. Hal Levowitz of the PD got wind of it, and they started the campaign in town, keep the Indians, keep the Indians. And they voted in October when the season ended to give the franchise one more shot. They signed a 10-year contract, so they were there. Then they got Colavito back in a trade. Attendance rose. They had a good year, played pretty good ball in 68. They had a good year, almost $1 million again. But then it really got bad. In 71, 72, they drew under 800,000. Now in 73, they drew a little over 600,000. Back to 71, under 600,000 again. Now, Nick Milletti bought the team in 72. And he was a Cleveland guy. Cavaliers, Barons, the Crusaders. He owned the arena. He was a BG guy. And he was going to give it a shot. But the way I'm thinking, one more of these years of 600,000 fans. Expansions looming. Seattle wanted baseball. Toronto wanted baseball. The nation's capital wanted baseball back. I'm thinking, one more of these years of 600,000 fans or 500,000 fans, and they could very well be on their way out. And that's what prompted me to write the book.
Now, were you going to every home game in previous seasons, or you just determined that you wanted to do it that season?
Never every home game, and not every home game that year. I lived in Akron. I was a college student, so I wasn't going to. But the thing is, back then, you could park for 50 cents. The Muni lot now was the 50-cent lot. Cross under 9th Street, go train tracks, go to the Muni lot, 50 cents. You could park for 50 cents. You sit in the bleachers for 50 cents. You could spend a weekend up there. You could bring your own food, bring your own drink. If you just wanted to go to the ball game, you could easily find ways to do it. The general admission tickets were $250. It was a great buy. So I would bet I went to maybe 30, 35 games, if not more, in 74.
So it wasn't a decision, I am going to every home game.
No.
How did you do the research for the games you didn't attend? And did you keep notes?
Well, I kept score of a lot of games. And that's just one of those years that, and I'm sure you have this same thing happen with you. When there's games that stick in your mind, they always stick in your mind. And that season was really, as a 19-year-old, was my first pennant race. They had never been in a pennant race that late into a season before. So if you weren't there, you had your radio with you. There weren't that many games on TV then. 48, 50, maybe 55, something like that. And in fact, they were on Channel 8 then. And, you were just, it sucked you in. If you were a fan, it brought you in, and it did with many Clevelanders that year again.
All right, so of course we're talking about the infamous 10-cent beer night riot of June 4th, and you were there, and you've done an exceptional job in your book of explaining the events and chronicling them. Why don't you run us through a little bit of it, what sticks out in your mind, maybe even now, and just go from there.
The amazing thing was they had done beer nights before that, and beer days. They had Nickel Beer Day back in 71. Beer nights were popping up all over baseball. When you can throw out a 10-cent beer night, and you're thinking 10-cent beer night, 2 beers, and we're only 10 cents, you could buy 6 at a time. That was kind of scary. And even I'm not a math guy, but I know that you could make many trips back and get 6 at a time. But, one of the amazing things about that night that maybe more than anything else was, it was a hot summer night. It was a beautiful night for early June. And the week before they were in Texas, And late in the game, Lenny Randall laid a bunt down to first baseline. You can find this clip on YouTube of what really started the whole thing. He lays down a bunt, and he just cleans the clock of Milt Wilcox going to first base. He was the Indian pitcher, was going to cover the bunt, and then it all broke loose. The bench is emptied. There was beer on the Indian dugout all night long. There was all kinds of garbage going on, and it was pretty much almost a riot in Texas. Now, the Ranger manager was Billy Martin, which just the perfect Hollywood part to the story, as Badland Billy was perfect for Texas. Cowboy hat, the cowboy boots, and he was her manager. And after the ball game, they go, well, Billy, you go to Cleveland next week. What do you think? He goes, they'll be mad, but on the other hand, no one goes anyway. That did not go well. If you were in Cleveland back then as either a youngster or an adult, you knew who Pete Franklin was. On 3WE, 50,000 watts, and he was Sports Talk with Pete Franklin nightly, 7 to 11, before the game, after the game, and Pete had no filter. And his words were, hey, you can say we can say we stink. We can say nobody goes, but you can't say that anywhere. The thing was, Billy Martin liked Cleveland. He played for Cleveland in 59. He liked the city, but that's just Billy being Billy. So this happens in the middle of the week in Texas. So Pete's got after the game on Wednesday. He's got Thursday. He's got Friday. He's got Monday to just really rev this game up with Texas coming to town the next Tuesday. So Pete's got everybody ready to go when they get to that ball game. Plus the club is starting to play better baseball. They're starting to win a little bit, and Pete calls it payback time. Well, the thing that still gets me, though, and they're very lucky that this did not happen. Now, they drew 25,000 that night, and that was a great Tuesday night crowd for early June then. Now, they started drawing much better later in the year. They had 7 or 8 crowds over 40,000, 35,000. If they would have had 10 more thousand there that night, somebody might have got killed. And that field was covered with people. They were lucky that it wasn't a Friday night, that it was a Tuesday night, or it could have really been more mayhem than it was already. You could smell the marijuana early in the game. And I never really did up there before had that sensation. I thought, well, this is different. Firecrackers out of the upper deck, even before the game began. I thought, boy, this is going to be different tonight. I was on crutches, broke my foot 3 weeks earlier. And I had my crutches with me. We sat in general admission in right field, which was a great seat. You were one section over, you were in a box seat. So you were pretty much in a box seat where you were at, about 5-7 rows back. And the fans, they kept filtering in. It was, there was traffic on 77 coming up. I thought, well, this is a good thing. But once I got in there, it was such a circus atmosphere for an Indians game. I thought, boy, this will be different tonight. And it didn't take long for it to start. You had a Ranger team that was pretty good. Our team was getting better. You had Ferguson Jenkins going for them, Fritz Peterson for the Indians. And, in the second inning, Tom Grieve homers. He was a Ranger outfielder. And the heavy-set woman gets up, and she's on top of the Indian dugout, wanders out there, pulls her top down, tries to kiss Nestor Shilek, the first base umpire, thinking, I've been to a lot of games, even though I'm only 19. I've never, ever witnessed this before. I'm thinking, Dave, maybe it'll settle down now a little bit. Well, Grieve homers again 2 innings later, gets to third base. A fan jumps out of the stands in left field. He's naked, slides into second base. And I'm thinking, this is nuts. Leron Lee, who was one of our outfielders, lines one back at Ferguson Jenkins, hits him in the knee. And you could hear it crack. The fans are chanting, hit him again, hit him again. I'm thinking, This is like a high school football game now. I'm thinking, this is so unusual. And it was still early in the game.
So you having attended so many games, you had a feel for the kind of the regular vibe, and you knew right away that this was a different feeling. So was it a combination of the crowd being revved up in advance by Pete Franklin and the newspapers?
Yes.
As well. There were cartoons that day, I think, in both papers. So you had the alcohol, you had the pre-violence revving, and you had the fact that the way a lot of people have described it is the 25,000 was made up of a lot of people who didn't normally go to games and who weren't even necessarily paying that much attention to the game. They were there for the atmosphere, more like maybe people who would end up going to the concerts at the stadium.
The baseball fans pretty much stayed in their seats. Everybody else, we could see them lined up behind that outfield fence. We had the table set up selling the beer. And it seemed like the steady stream was out there all night long. It seemed like that a quarter of the crowd was always behind the fence. I had no idea what was going on. And I thought, thing was for me, I didn't drink beer then. I don't drink it now. I could have cared less. I was one of those guys who I went to the ball game for one reason. I wanted to go to the ball game. That's who I still am now. And just see the different type of fans. And you're absolutely right. A majority were there because it was 10-cent beer night. Now, you still had a good core of Indian fans there, but the later it got in the game, the more things kept happening. You could tell that this wasn't anything near a typical baseball crowd. It was more like a football crowd that was going bad, and you could see it coming.
So if you were in right field, you were up close and personal to the event, the final event in the ninth inning that kicked off the actual riot onto the field.
You know, I can remember Herb Scored trying to get on the PA system, sixth inning maybe, to calm the crowd down. That did no good. And thank heavens the cops off duty were listening to Joe and Herb, because I thought, hey, we better get down there. And the Indian brass, they had taken off. They had left. But then the ninth inning comes, and gosh, they just tied the ball game. They were down 5-1, couldn't believe it. Sack fly ties the game. And here comes the guy out of right field to get Jeff Burrows' cap. And Burrows thought he was taking a swing at him. And he turns around and does what he does. And the Texas dugout, Billy had that straight view from third base to right field. Let's go get them, boys. And here they came with their bats in hand. And then the Indians go, hey, we got to go help them. So they came out of the Indian dugout. And then the fans just flooded that field. They tried to grab my crutches. We almost had fights in the stands because of that. I made sure I held on to them. They wanted to use them as weapons. And they were throwing the folding chairs. Tom Hilgendorf caught one in the head. One of the Indian relievers caught a folding chair in the head. Knives are being thrown. Almost caught Nestor Shalak behind the plate. And it seemed like it lasted forever. And there was nothing you could do about it. You know, when you watch the old films of Disco Night in Chicago, it wasn't covered like that, but it was pretty doggone close. The thing was, fans had come out in the field during the ball game, but no harm came from it. One guy ran by and gave a high five to Hendrick, Lowenstein, and Spikes in the outfield, but nothing. And the naked guy ran out trying to jump the fence, him and his buddy, and they got him back and they threw him down. But it wasn't anything violent. You were just thinking, though, why can't they just ease up and let us play this game? Because my thought, being the Indian fan who never been in a pennant race in his life, was, well, we forfeited. We'll lose by one game. It just seemed like that they couldn't get it under control, no matter what they did. And it took them a long time to do it. The drive home was awful. You're turning on to Pete, of course, and he was just out of his mind. And then you go back, we went the next night and sat in the same spot, talked with Steve Hargan, who had pitched for us in the late 60s. And we got there early enough where we could talk to him. He was my mom's favorite pitcher. I told him that, and he sat down and talked with us, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. I go, were you scared? He goes, yes and no. He goes, at first, when we ran out there, I'm thinking, this won't last long. He goes, and it did, of course. And it just seemed to escalate for him. When I later talked to Mike Hargrove about the night, he could see it coming all night too. He had a guy on the ground behind first base, and he got scared. When they all started coming out, you can see him coming from first base. He was literally scared. And thank heavens the Indians went out there and helped. But the next night was like going to a recital. Very, just light applause. Then they became a baseball crowd as the game went on. Cleveland won the game, hit 3 or 4 home runs, and they won the next night. And it became a baseball crowd. But it was never really a raucous crowd. And it never really got like you thought it might. It was very calm.
I think people were just kind of in shock.
Yeah, I think they still were too.
And they wanted to demonstrate, okay, that was a one-time thing. We're not going to repeat that. And we're not the people who did that. They're hungover, or they're in jail, or they're in the hospital. One of the things, besides of course the overall, and what a great retelling, thank you so much, is and that you were there, is there wasn't, or didn't seem to be, any hesitation for the Indians team, the players, to go out and support their fellow players. And when you think about it in retrospect, they're the enemy, at least during the game. They're the enemy. You'd had that incident in Texas just the week before, 5 days before, where they were literally battling each other. And yet when a true crisis emerged, it appears there was no hesitation at all.
Well, the baseball family is a baseball family, and they'll go to one another when things are like that. They still care when somebody gets hurt. I'm sure no one cared about Lenny Randall that night until they had to go out there to help them. But, they rise to the occasion. And you're right, there was no hesitation by the Indians to get out there immediately and help them off the field if they could. And, and that's what you love about the game. But, Lee McPhail pops up, the AL president, no more beer nights in Cleveland. Of course, I had 3 or 4 more with no issues. And there was nights scheduled in Milwaukee and KC the following day and the next day. And they were a little concerned about those, but nothing happened there either. It was just, oddly enough, the one time it happens, and still ever in baseball, it goes back to 1974 in Cleveland. But, with Billy, he was fine the next night. I can still see him throwing pebbles at the crowd at that third base dugout. That's a vivid memory. And he was playing right along with it. Part of the show, as he always was.
There were fans on top of the dugout too, right?
Oh yeah,
stomping up and down and pounding and really causing a ruckus.
And they couldn't get that under control because there wasn't enough security in early parts of the game. Doesn't make a difference if they would have had more control. I don't know, because once they came out, no matter what happens, you were outnumbered. Once they poured from the stands on each side, no matter how many cops were there, you were still outnumbered.
And in a way, even just those onesie-twosie intrusions onto the field earlier puts it in your mind that, that's kind of okay. I mean, for things to have erupted at the end there. You kind of psychologically, it's like, well, we've seen people out on the field, so it's kind of okay. Maybe today is different as far as for things to break loose the way they did at the end.
And it's funny, Cleveland was always a city back then. If you watch any old Browns highlight films from the early 70s, many times after a big win, the fans would storm the field, carry Leroy Kelly off the field. There was never an issue. When they won that 64 title game, the cops rimmed Municipal Stadium, which probably over 100. It did no good. They swarmed the field, tore the goalpost down, but there was no issues. but they would storm the field early in the 70s after a Browns win, and there was never an issue. They'd walk off with the players. Cops never stopped them.
It was in jubilation.
Yes, and
it wasn't threatening.
And even sometimes during jubilation, something happens, but it never did. But this time, I always wondered if they could have controlled it earlier. Could they have stemmed it off? And, with the alcohol doing all the talking, probably not. It was just meant to be that night. You said it, the perfect storm was there, and those who could take advantage of it, jumping on the field for the first time, I'm going out there. They were going no matter what.
That's a good point about, I hadn't really thought about so much that it was just a much more common thing, usually in celebration, for people to run out on the field. But I remember, I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I remember my uncle took my cousins and I to a Pro Bowl game in probably the late 60s, and we all ran on the field after the game. There was nothing weird about it. There was all kinds of people running out there. We're just, at the time we were kids, I was like 10 years old, so to see these massive human beings, and you're right next to them and you see how big they really are. It was amazing. But, we're just running around, and my uncle didn't even think anything of it. Just like, meet, you got to get back here. We need to, I need to get you home or your parents will be mad at me. But that's a good point about it. It was just a different feel, and people had maybe a little more latitude with how they behaved. Another thing that's different, of course, and wow, what a great discussion. We don't have to take much more of your time, but the line between fans and players, you kind of alluded to it earlier, wasn't like it is now. They were more like kind of normal human beings who happened to be great at a sport. They weren't these demigods with entourages surrounding them. I'm sure you've seen a difference just even at AA.
Yeah, the game's changed so much. The AA guys, they appreciate the fans. They are always giving to them, which I still enjoy seeing that very much. If they come out before a game, they can sign an autograph, they will still do it. Now, with the netting up, it gets a little different now because you can't get to them as much as you could, say, 4 years ago. Now, the Guardians still try it. They still come out and chat before home games when they come out to loosen up, play catch before the game. I think they realize they need them, but you're right. It's so different now. I can remember my first camera day would have been in '66, and you could get as close as you could get, and the players would walk right up to you, stand 5 feet from you, take a picture, and those would never happen now. Of course, today, you can't have bat day anymore. You can't have ball day anymore, which is really a shame they can't have bat days. Those were tremendous days, and they're gone. And it's just part of how society is.
Yeah. Well, we can leave it at that. All right. Great talking to you, Jim. Any other thoughts?
No. Thanks for having me. It was a wonderful night in history. I wish it would have ended differently. That was a great season. I hold it dear still. It's still one of my favorite years because they drew the city back to baseball. 40,000 crowds, Bosman's no-hitter, the Gaylord Perry 15 straight wins. It just, everything, talk about the storm was set for them to really win big. And I always thought if Gaylord wins that 16th game, maybe the tide stays turning their way and they roll to a division title. Who knows? But it was a tremendously fun year for me. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Great talking with you, Jim. Before we launch into the Heading for Home docudrama in 2 weeks, next week we dig into the events of that fateful game at Cleveland Stadium on June 4th, 1974 with journalists Vince Guerreri and Bob Dyer.